And joining us now on the debate, Lisa Anderman, psychiatrist at Mount Sinai Hospital; Carleen Moore, counselor at the Toronto Rape Crisis Centre; Carla Lucchetta, writer and contributing essayist for Your Agenda Insight; and Patricia Pearson, journalist and author of A Brief History of Anxiety. I want to thank the four of you, first of all, for coming in tonight to have this discussion. And I want to start off by reading something. A lot of thoughtful stuff's been written about this. Judith Timpson had this to say in the Globe and Mail about this. I'm going to read an excerpt and then we'll talk. All week long, it came at us: grisly court evidence, grotesque media pictures, heartbroken statements from grieving relatives, and finally, a riveting videotape of an astonishingly skillful police interrogation. The Russell Williams sentencing hearing in Belleville has been one for our age, a multi-platform onslaught of deeply disturbing details as it chronicled a powerful man's escalating fetishistic crime spree, break-ins to steal lingerie from girls as young as 12 and masturbate in it, sexual assaults, and finally, the brutal assault and murder of two women, all of which he meticulously photographed. Once the commander of Canada's largest Air Force base, the disgraced colonel has pled guilty and will now go away for at least 25 years, hopefully never to be paroled. So where do we go from here? What can we take away from this shocking saga that speaks to our own lives, our own fears, our own safety? Okay, that sets up our discussion to some extent, and I want to start by just getting some reactions from around the table here. As you were hearing the case, Carla, start with you. As you were hearing the case and these details emerging in court, what'd you think?
Well, obviously it's horrific, and you don't really want to read. I find myself reading in short, very selective bits of information until my curiosity takes over. I feel just as much fear for myself as and people I know, young women that I know who maybe aren't as well versed in looking after themselves yet. But when you think about what those families go through, not only knowing that that happened to their child, sisters, but then that they have to relive it in court. And the whole thing is just awful.
Carleen.
Oh, what did I think? I'll tell you, I was sad. I was really sad. I was sad for those women who were raped, stalked, and murdered. I was also sad for the community and however we define community on this issue. Because here we go again in Canada, one more time going through this. So my initial reaction was I was sad, and I was also angry. I was angry at this man. I was angry at the response, that it was insufficient.
Response by whom was insufficient?
Well, that's a good question, right? Response by a lot of us, right, in this community. And thirdly, I think to this point of reading selective bits, I've talked to lots of women, and lots of us, maybe this is a Toronto phenomenon, just there's a full stop. It's like you see that picture in the underwear, remember? And it's just like, whoa, the revulsion, the pullback, right? The issue that may not be so much fear, that's been named a lot, fear, it may be other issues coming forward.
We'll discuss all those over the course of our program tonight. Okay, Lisa, how about you? As the details were emerging, you thought what?
I was also being kind of careful about what I was reading and how much I was reading. I think with so many sources of information, it's easy to get overwhelmed by hearing too many details. So I myself was not reading too many stories about it. It's just such a coming after the humanist moment of the Chilean miners being rescued and everybody being in this kind of global kind of celebration of that, to have this happen so soon afterwards and completely take over the front pages of the media was pretty shocking and a surprise.
You have a professional angle in this as well, though, in some respects, and I wonder where, you as average citizen who wants to know more about what's happening in the courts, where that ends and where your, understandable professional interest in what's going on in this guy's head would have taken over.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not a forensic psychiatrist, so I'll say that up front. I can't speculate on what drove him to do this or anything like that. But, we maybe in less dramatic ways deal with a lot of similar situations with a lot of our patients and their families on a daily basis. So we're used to hearing people tell us that they're kind of either avoiding the news or feeling anxious by situations like this.
Gotcha. Patricia.
Well, having covered the trial of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka about 15 years ago, I feel like I've been there, done that in terms of that level of exposure to this degree of evil. And I felt, once again, that I was essentially participating almost in a kind of pornographic experience with it, where it was too much, it was too detailed. I felt like it was a violation of the victims all over again and of their families, and I didn't want to participate in it, so I more or less deliberately refused to watch it.
Was it a mistake for all of that information to come out in court, do you think?
No, not out in court, but you know, the media can make up their own judgments about the way they filter it through to the public, so that you don't have to run across it, you know, when you're
Okay.
right.
Yeah, hold off on that because we're going to get to the sort of the media role in all this in a few minutes. Carla, a follow-up. Did you have any reactions as you started to hear? Did you have any reactions in yourself that surprised you?
Well, I think Patricia brought up the Bernardo case, and I have some residual feelings about that case based on the fact that I was name associated with Karla Homolka for a long time during her trial. And then when I watched the Karla movie and saw the depiction of Paul Bernardo calling her name, which was essentially my name, it was just
Spelled differently, though.
felt a little too close to home.
Spelled differently.
Spelled differently, but that didn't seem to matter at the time. I don't think I felt anything unpredictable. I think the fear of someone hiding in plain sight, someone that you could possibly know in your life that might be related to you, that could be someone in authority to you, is something that's very real and never that far away from my mind.
Patricia, anything in your reactions to this that surprised you, even though you'd been through some of this before?
I think what surprised me a little bit was the degree of refusal to engage in it that I now have. So after several years of being a crime journalist and kind of stepping on the rake all the time, of deliberately going and exposing myself to this kind of material, I just finally got to a point where I was like, I don't actually need to know this. Guess what? I really, really don't. It's not going to change. I mean, the sexual assault rates have remained stable for the last 25 years, right, in Ontario. It doesn't matter how much we know about this stuff.
Carleen?
What surprised me, it was interesting you brought up Homolka and Bernardo, was I remember the École Polytechnique, and then Homolka Bernardo, and now this, that the response from women has been the same. This kind of stunnedness, and then there's a very conscious, whether or not we're vocal about it, how much will I engage with this? Because there is a deal when the information is very public, what is this going to get me? If I look at these pictures, what do I get? Because I frankly know my assault rates, right, if I'm informed. Or I have my own experience of sexual violence. So what is this going to get me? And I think when we're looking at media, and I know you said we'd move on, it's this kind of, diving into a pool of garbage, because you're not going to get anything good. It's not functional on an individual or a community level.
Well, but you deal with this every day, right?
Sure.
You're at the Rape Crisis Center.
That's all I do.
So was there a part of this that for you was of professional interest, because it might give you some added insight into, I don't know, whatever it is that you deal with every day?
No.
None of that.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of focus on why do these guys do this, whatever it is that we're talking about that they do in terms of sexualized violence. I don't see that decades of doing that work, has given us the insight to be able to lessen the rates of sexual violence. So thank you. So I wonder if this is a fruitful avenue to go down. When we think about those pictures in the papers, front and center, of him in the underwear, what did that give us as a community? How did that help? And I think it frankly served to silence women even further than we have been.
Well, let me pick up on that. Lisa, there's been some discussion about how men and women have reacted to hearing the news and the details about all this, and whether their reactions are similar or different. Have you noticed anything on that front?
Between men and women? I mean, from the small number of people I've talked to about this, not really. I think the men I know are equally shocked to have had this happen, especially to somebody, I mean, the surprise to everyone is that he was a high-profile person who had many security clearances and a lifetime career, that was pretty faultless before this happened, whereas nobody knew who Paul Bernardo was before he made it into court. So I think that was a surprise in terms of how somebody could go undetected for so long and have things kind of have such a secret life.
Carla, any difference in the way men and women that you've been in contact with have reacted to this?
I wouldn't say that I've talked to a lot of men about it, but I wouldn't discount the fact that they're probably, they have the same reactions. After all, they are related to and in relationships with women who are at risk. So I'm sure they have feelings about it.
Any sense, Patricia, that guys felt embarrassed about this? I can't believe I'm the same gender as this animal. Any of that kind of thing you pick up on?
No. I mean, I think women tend to be the primary consumers of true crime material. And I think one of the reasons for that, at least it's been theorized, is that because it's not about them, in other words, the villain is not them, it's almost easier for them to consume it than it is for a man who thinks, I don't want to think that could be me, no way. Generally speaking, I haven't heard a boo out of men about this whole subject.
Would you expect to?
In my circle? Not necessarily.
I don't know who's in your circle, so.
Well, I think everyone was, I heard a lot about the Chilean miners.
Right.
And I heard a lot about the U.S. midterms. But yeah, I don't think people wanted to talk about this.
Carlene, how about you? You have many men in your circle, and if so, did they react differently?
They got real quiet when I got angry, right? I think there is no we don't have a container for women's anger and rage around this. And I think that women feel a lot of things about this, and not just fear, right? I think there's anger and rage. My question to men or male-identified people is, where is your rage? What I get is a lot of, that's not me. And it's like, well, good for you.
So they're acting defensively about it.
Yes, and it's like, I didn't attack you. I haven't named you in this. I actually want you on my side. But unless you can put out those feelings of, are you angry about this? Are you as feeling hopeless about this? Does this touch you at all? Or is it, oh, Chilean miners out, guy got convicted, oh, hockey's on. Is it that kind of a thing? I don't believe it truly, but on the surface, I see that happening a lot. So that is also a little enraging. I want that response to be there. I want the dialogue to occur.
Right. Lisa, let me get you again to put the psychiatrist hat on here. And what do we know about what kind of an impact this kind of a case can have on women who have not any experience at all with male-on-female violence?
Well, I think there's generally a wide range of responses to a story like this, which is, really, this depth of a story is a very rare event, whereas people can experience all kinds of things in their lives that might not get to that point. But I think, people can go from two poles. One is a kind of minimizing, avoidant sort of pole, and the other pole is a catastrophizing, where you become embedded in the details and feel like you have to know everything to have a mastery of all the facts and details to be able to maintain a sense of safety.
You know what, there's a question I want to ask everybody here, and I, in a way, feel I have no right to ask it. So if you don't want to answer, that's okay. And I'll tell you why I ask it, and that is that I am constantly surprised in, when we have these conversations with female friends of mine, how many women have encountered at some point in their life some kind of unwanted male-on-female attention, male-on-female violence, some kind of inappropriate something. Okay, you want to talk about, let's start with you. Have you been the recipient of any of this kind of?
Of course.
You have?
Of course. And I think that, again, when it is epidemic.
And when you say of course, do you want to be more specific?
The only pan-Canadian survey, so the only government federal money that's gone into studying this was in 1993. And they asked women, when have you experienced sexual violence in the last year? They're not talking about when you were kids or adolescents.
Past year.
Right, past year. 52% said yes, adult women. When we looked at rates of over 16-year-old women.
And are you part of that 52%?
You better believe it.
You are.
When you look at women over 16, it's 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 4 of us. If you look at that stat of 1 out of 3, that means that experiencing sexual violence is a normative experience scientifically. That is catastrophic. I'm not even talking about children here.
Patricia, are you in that category?
Yeah, not recently, but yeah, sure, absolutely.
Carla?
Yeah, I've been followed in underground parking lots. I've been followed on the street. Working at a television station out west, I had a death threat. It's something I definitely think about.
The death threat was unrelated to a story you were doing? It was a male-female thing? You were convinced of that?
I was the target because of just being one of the producers on the show, and he was mad at the show, but I had to take it to court. And I wouldn't say that my employer actually took it all that seriously.
Lisa?
I'm not sure I'm comfortable revealing details here, but I
that's
would
fine.
say I'm probably in that category in a small way, maybe longer ago than.
And I think when we get this gender divide, I think, again, you are uncomfortable. You don't know if you have the right to ask this question, so I ask it back to you.
It's a personal question.
Have you had this experience?
Have I had an experience coming my way?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Not that I know of. But
I think
I guess
that's the engagement with men, that when men want to come forward and say, I want to understand about this, we got to bring, their hearts have to crack a little bit and say, well, what do I know from my lived reality about this? Maybe I'm not the survivor of sexual violence, but I certainly know someone in my circle who was a violator, right?
Because my understanding of this is it's mostly a male on female thing, and therefore the likelihood that the four of you will have experienced something versus me is greater.
Unless we're talking about childhood rapes.
Yeah.
Can I just say,
Okay,
but
please.
I don't think it's something that necessarily we talk about. When I have these experiences, if I have been followed, and I don't think I've ever told anyone I was followed underground once when I was going to my car. This was years and years ago. It's because, as you say, some of it is just part of, you know, the fact that we're women and men sometimes do these things. So I wouldn't say that you know, if that's a high percentage, if people are, you know, actually admitting it, I don't know if everybody does always remember to tell someone that that happened.
That's consistent with, when I've had these conversations with female friends of mine, your experiences are consistent with that. I have been shocked at how many who, you know, don't apparently display any, I don't know, indication that they've ever gone through anything like this. When you sit them down and talk to them a little longer, yes, they will confess these guys. All right, let's pick up on media coverage, because there has been a lot of conversation about whether or not papers should have printed certain details or put certain pictures in, and I want to get to some of that right now. And to that end, let me quote Sylvia Stead, the associate editor of the Globe and Mail, who had this explanation. Our front page this morning, the Globe and Mail chose to run a close-cropped picture of Colonel Russell Williams' face staring coldly and maliciously into the camera. We felt that look into his face was chilling, given the evidence presented in court yesterday and the evidence still to come of his charges. Although the articles explain the evidence of all of the crimes committed in great detail, we chose not to run the photographs of Williams in women's lingerie, in part because the readers have no choice in what photographs they see on the front page. They can choose to read the articles and to stop when it might become difficult, but not so with photographs. Let's get into this. Nobody here works for newspapers, so I'm not asking you to defend you know, what the papers have done or haven't done. But let's have some discussion about this. Patricia, to you first. What journalistic purpose do you think it served to publish the pictures of Russell Williams in women's clothing?
Well, nothing. It served no purpose at all. But it's not just a question of whether it served any kind of higher purpose. It's also a question of the proportionate coverage. So on that given day, for instance, what was going on in the Congo? What was going on in South Africa? What was going on in Greece? I mean, you know, the choice to not only cover this, but to cover it as the most significant front page story, we just accept that as somehow that's inherently as granted. But why is it as granted? I mean, there were many other, you know, extremely pressing issues of that day. So, you know, you have to think about that as well.
Crime sells, period, full stop.
Yeah, well, so just, you know, own up to that. And they never do. They never own up to that. They turn it into a much more important and justified story.
Carla, what do you think?
Well, I think, you know, in these days of wall-to-wall coverage, we're sort of resigned to that now. My objection wasn't with newspapers and television. My objection was with Twitter. And I don't think that it should have been live tweeted. The Twitter restriction is only 14 years of age. You've got, this is happening amid one person telling you what they're having for lunch, another person is talking about being, you know, held up on transit and late for a meeting, and then the very next tweet is horrific details of a woman dealing with torture and rape and murder.
So live tweeting from the courthouse was over the line for you?
Totally object to that.
Lisa, how about you?
I would agree. I mean, I wasn't aware of those details because I'm not on Twitter, but yeah, I think pictures don't give you some choice about whether, you know, you read the story more in detail or not, but I think it's probably too much.
Good or bad idea to publish the pictures of him in women's lingerie on the inside pages of the paper?
Yeah, I mean, it's something, in a way, it's, you know, picture's worth 1,000 words. It's a very shaming thing, I think, for him that might make more of an impact on readers in a way than just the news that he's going to court, or that he's going to jail and is guilty for what he's done. I mean, if you can see it that way, but I'm not sure people can erase those pictures once they've seen them. They kind of stick with you more than some other things.
What about that, Carlene? You put a picture like that in the paper, it's going to stay with you for a lot longer.
It is, and it's going to, I think, further silence women. I think women can have a lot of responses to that. And one of the things we haven't talked about, you mentioned it, which is so great, which is shame, but it's not his shame, it's our shame. When we see that picture, our visceral body response based on our lived reality, based on our sisters, our mothers, whoever, there is for some of us shame, and that is a silencing
What is that
response.
about? Why would you feel shame?
Well, why would I feel shame if I was sexually assaulted? But that's a common response, right? So we have to look at the broader implications, right? And when a newspaper or a media outlet chooses to not examine, again, what is the implications of what we are doing? Because this is not merely a listing of facts. This was not the coverage, was he did this, then he did this, then we did this, then he did this, then he pled guilty. It was not that. And that is not functional to actually moving towards some sort of community accountability for what this man has done, right? And what he continues to do. He's not doing it right now, but it doesn't assist with that, but it says that it does. It says this is all in the name of justice. This is not in the name of justice. Thank you. In the name of justice.
You're saying yes, but let me follow up for a second. You know, Heather Malik wrote a lot of very powerful columns about this in the Toronto Star, and the Star published a lot of stuff and a lot of details and a lot of pictures. And Heather believes that was the right thing to do, that the Star did an important public service by completely unmasking this guy in all of his evil. Do you agree?
Well, I think there are different ways you can go about that. I mean, let me put it to you this way. The underwear and the bra that he was sporting belonged to someone, right? If that had belonged to my 14-year-old daughter and I saw it in the Globe and Mail, what kind of impact do you think that would have on me as a mother? So, I mean, these aren't department store acquisitions. These are people's purloined intimate objects.
But does a newspaper have to make a decision on the basis of whether they're going to offend the sensibilities of one person, or do they have to consider the broader community?
Well, what does the broader community care whether they see somebody in bra and panties?
Because this guy's evil is completely there for you to see in all its gory detail if you do that.
Watch Dexter. I mean, in other words, I'm really pressing you on this because I think that we've got
I'm not defending it, I'm just saying, giving the explanation.
I'm just saying, I think we've got this cliched idea about this narrative now in terms of crime in North America, and we think that somehow we have some sort of obligation to go into the gory details of all of these individuals, and we don't.
Carla, do we?
I would say that, you know, the thing that stops me from moving in further, obviously because I was going to be here, I read a lot more on this than I normally would have, is when you start thinking about, you know, to see a man sporting underwear, women's underwear, you know, we're heavy consumers of pornography now because of the internet, right? So you can see that if you really want to on fetish sites, and not even on fetish sites anymore. It's normal. What stops me from being able to go further is this idea that those of who that underwear belonged to. The fact that this guy came into 82 houses and took photos of an underwear drawer that we all have, that our children have, that our teenage you know, relatives have. This is not a movie, this is not a television series, this is real life. So I think there has to be some more protections there, especially for, as I said on Twitter, there has to be more than a disclaimer.
If they didn't publish that picture on the front page of the paper, do they get any kudos for that? Is that good judgment?
I guess, yeah.
Lisa, maybe you're the best person here to assess what the impact of seeing those kinds of pictures would be on members of the broader community. What's the answer to that?
Well, as I said before, I think, you know, for somebody who might not have this in their history or anything like it, then, you know, they might, you know, have an image sticking in their mind, they might have phrases or things sticking in their mind that are causing some distress or making them feel like they might need to talk about it with someone. If you have experienced violence and some form of sexual violence, then, you know, this might bring back your own past history of traumas and actually cause, you know, symptoms and a lot of suffering.
Carlene, the media are great at saying we do what we do because it's in the public interest, because we have an obligation to, you know, reflect back to society that which we learn. You know, we're in the truth-telling business, or the best available version of it we can find on the deadlines we work. And you've heard all of those explanations come forward as reasons why so much detail and some of these pictures were published. Do you think that's closer to the truth, or do you think what's closer to the truth is it sells, it'll sell papers, we're in the business to make money and sell papers?
I think individually, your first point, people can have the best intentions. Systemically, we live in a capitalist world. You're going to sell papers, right? I think if it was in the interest of truth, why do we not have pictures of a panel from the Canadian military discussing what is the meaning of having one of their top guys be a now forever renowned serial rapist, kidnapper, stalker, murderer? I don't know what to call him. Like, I don't know where to put this guy. That would be interesting. That would be fruitful, right? There's no accountability in the reporting of facts. That's gone, right? There is accountability in terms of how people are talking about this and who we are going to for the facts, right? Because there are facts in the Canadian military. I'm not hearing about it. All I hear is he's been stripped of his
Title.
His title.
His rank.
And I don't care. I don't care about that. I care about the other guys there. I care that he was seen with Peter MacKay, and they kept showing that picture. Where's Peter MacKay's statement? Don't I have a right to that? Don't we, as Canadian citizens, have a right to that? What were you doing with this man? I don't care whether you knew or not knew. What are you going to do in future?
You don't care if you knew. I mean, whether he knew or didn't know makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it?
Well, if he, I'm assuming, I guess he
Let's
didn't
assume
know.
he didn't know.
Didn't
Yeah.
know. You're right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, but now that he does know, what is he going to do? He has this. I have this information. I've always had this information about what is possible in the world, what evil is possible. Now he has it, and it's been close to him, but he is silent.
Well, beyond disassociating himself, obviously, from this guy and what he did, what more do you want him to do?
I don't know. Let him be creative, right? Let him be, this is how I'm going to talk to my male friends and my male colleagues, and this is what I'm going to insist the military do in terms of trying to lessen the levels of sexual violence perpetrated by members of the military. I don't have perfect answers, but I'd like something more than the nothingness that currently exists. Or my option is nothing, or looking at these photos. Nothing, or hearing the play-by-play. Nothing, or hearing this was excellent policing. Right? I don't believe this was excellent policing. We have two women dead.
Well, it wasn't, because women weren't even given any kind of warning about this, or they were given a very limited warning about it, and that concerns me a lot.
Let's, we got about 10, 12 minutes left here. Let's come full circle. I want to remember the last line of that Judith Timson piece that I read off the top of the program. What can we take away from this saga that speaks to our own lives, our own fears, and our own safety? And I want to pick up on that. Now, anecdotally, we've heard that some women wanted to follow the coverage. Others did not. I've heard your different experiences here today. Others didn't, not because they weren't interested, but because it was just too much, the details, it was all too much anxiety. Is that desire, Lisa, to you first, is that desire, keep this monster away from me, keep the details of this monster away, I don't want to read about this, I don't want to know about this, is that emotionally healthy?
I'm not sure that avoiding something completely is emotionally healthy. I think, we've, like what you were just saying, that between nothing and everything, there's got to be some balanced place that you can, have some realistic idea of what's
How do you know where that is?
You talk to people, you have discussions like this, you talk to other women, other men, and find out what are the community norms, what are people doing, where,
Why would burying your head in the sand not be an advisable approach?
Because I think that doing that is, not maybe the best response, because it can,
Let's face it, the chances of this happening to anybody, am I going to get in trouble for saying this? The chances of this kind of thing happening to somebody else, like this is a once-in-a-generation kind of a crime, right? So this is not, this...
Unless you're a sex worker.
Unless you're a Native woman.
Yeah.
yeah.
So we're getting a lot of provisos to my
And also,
what
when you're talking about
I'm
this,
asking, why do you need to know that this is such a rare occurrence? That why do you need to know about this? And you're saying it's not that rare an occurrence. Even like this is not that rare an occurrence.
Yep. Being kidnapped, being held against your will, right? Being raped, and being threatened with death. Not as rare as we think.
Not as rare as we think, but still rare. Hopefully, no.
What do you mean by rare? Again,
Once in a generation.
If you're a sex worker, no. But even in the papers right now, Steve, it's not once in a generation. Homolka and Bernardo, This guy, Picton, thank you. And we have the Native women, which is beyond catastrophic of what's going on. So we can't say this is a once in a generational thing. It is not. And I think that's the hard piece, again, on a community level to actually let in, right? To actually talk about it. And sometimes that's like, I can deal with my own survivorship. I can deal with what happened to my sister. I can deal with what happened over here. I can deal with protecting my daughter.
Right.
But all of this, that's overwhelming because there are no containers anywhere to have these conversations.
Carla, pick up on this if you would. Where's the, burying your head in the sand or reading every single detail of it? Which is, where's the healthy line?
Well, for me personally, I'm a woman who lives alone, and I walk around at night by myself. I take transit at night by myself. I have to be aware. And so
I got to tell you, I'm astonished you just said that on television. I am. Like, that's the kind of thing you're not supposed to tell people, right?
Hopefully nobody who's watching knows who I live, except where I live, except my relatives. But no, I mean, I think we have to arm ourselves with awareness and, self-defense if you so choose. But the one piece in the details of this that I haven't been able to forget, and I'm sure that none of us can, is one of the women, I forget which one now because they're blended in my head, basically saying, "Don't kill me. I've been a good girl." Right. That speaks to the shame. I think about that when I put my head down, and wonder, when I wake up, is it going to be because there's a masked man in my house? It's not something I think about all the time. This does bring it up. I think you just have to be aware. You have to read enough to keep your awareness up. And anything beyond that is, a personal preference.
It is interesting. We talked earlier about the fact that this is more prevalent. The unwanted male advances or violence are more prevalent than we think. And even Judith Timpson, in writing this piece for the Globe and Mail, confessed in the middle of one of her pieces that, that she had been the victim of an unwanted break-in and near assault in her own home many years ago. The guy, they weren't married at the time, but her, I guess, fiance or whatever it was at the time, saved her. From a potential attack. Where are you on this in terms of, I know in your own life you decided you didn't want to read every single detail of all this, but head in the sand can't be the right answer either, is it?
It isn't. It's not putting your head in the sand. It's making it's engaging in a kind of moral act of resistance. It's saying, I'm refusing to participate in this particular narrative presentation, right? It doesn't mean that you aren't then going to attend a conference on sexual violence or talk to your daughter about what you see in the world around her or whatever.
Because Judith said that she immersed herself in the details of this case as a kind of a therapy for her in a way. I guess partially professionally and partially because of what she'd been through in her own life. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it made sense to me several years ago. Not consciously, but unconsciously, that was something I did a lot of. I interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer's mother, and I went to spent time in maximum security prisons in California. Actually, the only time I ever got stalked, ironically, was when I was driving to a women's prison in California, and the guy realized where I was going, and he was like, "Oh, never mind." So I'm heading straight for prison. But I think that for me at the time, there was this kind of engagement with the idea of well, what is a psychopath? And if this guy's a psychopath, how does he correlate with the men in my life and the ones who have dumped me and the weird relationships I've had? And you kind of play around with it. It's sort of playing with fire a little bit, because then you begin to see everybody as really toxic around you.
Well, that's, Lisa, I don't know how much you can tell us about this, but in the counseling of people that you may deal with, patients, clients, whatever you call them, how much do you advise them to tell themselves, look, at the odds of something like this happening to me are, okay, I don't know what number to put on it because I don't want to get bogged down on them. It's unlikely to happen to me, and I have to remind myself that it's unlikely to happen to me, and that's part of how you face that fear. Do you do that?
I think we do that. It's a kind of reality testing and talking about how, possible things might be and talking about different scenarios with people about what might be safe. Can I walk down this alley? Can I go out at noon versus midnight? And we do have very practical discussions sometimes, but it's not advice. People have to make their own decisions and find out how they're going to live their lives the way they want to after something like this happens, and hopefully not shrink their lives and stay home and not go out because they're afraid. That's not going to help them.
Do you have these conversations with yourself where you say, look, the odds on this happening to me are infinitesimal, and I'm going to live my life the way I want to live my life?
Yeah, absolutely. But taking it back to where we were talking about men, I think that the men in our lives, men in women's lives, have to try to understand the fear. You know, like there's got to be you can't live with the fear every day. So if you tell a man in your life, your father, your brother, your boyfriend, your husband, that you're feeling fearful because you were followed or something, then I think that's when they need to really take it seriously and not say, oh, it's not going to happen. If they hear it from you that it upset you, that's a responsibility that they have. I'm not saying that men have their own risk factors with violence, and so it's just something that they can do to participate in it. That's
Carleen,
helpful.
Do women in our society, Carleen, walk around in fear of being attacked?
Way more than you'll ever know. One of the things we learn growing up in a highly genderized society is don't tell men. But we've been told since we were little all sorts of, frankly, really catastrophically bad information about how to keep ourselves safe, such as stay at home, you're safer, right? Not so true, right? Only 18% of the time are we assaulted by someone who's a stranger. So 85% of the time it's someone we know. We do not protect our girls. We do not say things like, watch out for Uncle Joe. And maybe we need to, right? So yes. That doesn't mean that we don't have other feelings about our society, right? It's not just fear, and a lot of times we judge the fear. So one of the things I wanted to say is don't judge your fear. If you're afraid, do something about it. What are you afraid of? This woman, Judith, said she was afraid. Was it Judith? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
She replaced her windows, right?
Right.
If you're afraid and replacing your windows works, do it. Don't judge your fear. If you're afraid, take care of yourself. If you're angry, you're angry. What are you angry about? Do something about it, right? And one of the things we did was organizing Take Back the Night. But anyway, this is something I can see that you need to go to attend to in this is ourselves. Is to say, if I'm afraid, I can take care of myself. I can reach out and get help. If I'm angry, I can express that successfully and get changes in my life to improve the quality of my life.
Okay, we got to leave it there. I want to thank all four of you for coming in and having what is a hard conversation to have, but very important, as you pointed out. Lisa Anderman, the psychiatrist at Mount Sinai Hospital. Carla Lucchetta, writer, contributing essayist to this program. On the other side of the table, Patricia Pearson, author, A Brief History of Anxiety. Carleen Moore from the Toronto Rape Crisis Centre. Thank you all very much.